But they don't seem to have that same sort of devotion to their owners that dogs do.
Cats are just entitled, aren't they? Everyone just sort of walk around going, hey, you look after me.
It's not so much jealousy with cats, it's just been like, what the hell is going on, and how dare you upset my routine?
What sort of dog is yours, Anton? What sort of behaviours does...
I'm not too sure what sort of dog he is. We got him from a place called Dog Watch in Christchurch just after the earthquakes. The whole litter was sort of abandoned. So he's a rescue dog, but he's fiercely loyal. And I think that's one of the cool things about dogs is they're always really happy when you come home. Even after you've had a terrible, rough day, you can always count on your dog being super excited to see you. So that's always nice to come home to. I suppose, they're fiercely loyal. They're just asking for a bit of loyalty back, I guess, aren't they? That's fair enough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wonderful stuff. Laura, thank you very much for that. Meanwhile, a really big response to looking forward to sort of seeing what the panel have to say about this later on in the program. Jan says, always hang out the washing if possible. Sun provides vitamin D, that's all we need. Washing smells much better dried outside. I don't know about that. Is that a bit of a theory or not? Once upon a time we hung out nappies, and that was said to be good for the baby's bottom. It saves electricity, it's good exercise. So, yes, indeed. Dryer or sunshine. Mind you, if you put it in the dryer, 40 minutes, boom, it's done, isn't it? All right, time for I've Been Thinking. Heather Roy, would you like to start?
Thank you, Wallace. Well, I've been thinking, in fact, it's been brought to mind several times recently about that 1980s advertising campaign, Don't Leave Home Till You've Seen the Country, which was put out by Tourism New Zealand. And
recall it well?
Yeah, it was a really funny ad, and I looked at it again this morning. You just need to Google Don't Leave Home Till You See the Country, and you can be reminded of the guy sitting in the back of a taxi somewhere overseas and being asked about something quintessentially New Zealand, and I think it was a place in New Zealand, and he said, I don't know, I've never been there.
What was the context? What was the reasoning behind that ad, I wonder?
Oh, well, I think it was just reminding people to go and see your own country before you head away overseas. And the reason I was reminded about it, actually, again, very recently, I went with my husband to Taranaki at the weekend to visit my son, and he thought that we needed to be entertained, so he took us to some of the local attractions, which were great. We went to the Tawhiti Museum in Hawera and the Pukeiti Gardens near New Plymouth, and, both absolutely amazing local attractions, and we spent hours there and could have actually spent a lot more time. And it just reminded me that I've actually really enjoyed seeing parts of New Zealand that I probably wouldn't have had I been able to travel internationally recently. It's also, with the slow opening up of the borders, made me realise that actually I haven't got the same yearning to go and explore overseas at the moment now as I have about my own country. And I think that's a really good
interesting?
thing.
I've heard that from quite a few people. They've actually had somewhat of an epiphany discovering Aotearoa in a way that they might not have otherwise. Anton, do you reckon?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, we've sort of in some ways been forced into a bit of a corner, but probably a good corner to be forced into. And I really enjoy exploring our own backyard. We've got as part of our business, we've got a food truck, and we often find ourselves driving around, in particular the South Island, and I actually really love it. I take the opportunity to go and check out the local shops and speak to the locals and check out some of those local attractions that Heather was talking about.
And the second-hand stores, they're always great.
You always find something good in there, don't you? So, no, I actually really enjoy it. I don't know if that's just me making up excuses because international travel has been so expensive, and so you sort of have to, convince yourself that local is best. But no, I actually really enjoy it, to be honest.
Well, this Tawhiti Museum in Hawera, Heather, interesting, never been there. Worth a look, yeah?
It's a great wee museum, and people had told me about it previously, and my son had wanted to go there for a while. He lives in New Plymouth, and it's got, it's just great on the local history. And we took the whalers and traders option and wandered around seeing all sorts of things from the Taranaki history there. But they've also got this little boat, and you go on a little sort of 10 to 15 minute boat trip around several different scenes that have been put together by Weta Workshops, demonstrating the trading and the whaling history of the area. It was absolutely amazing. Every bit as good as other displays that I've seen elsewhere around the world.
Good shout out, thank you very much. Or Anton Matthews, I've been thinking.
Yeah, look, I've been thinking a lot about financial literacy lately, and in particular how I can, as a parent of a couple of young children, I've just got a new one that's just arrived about 6 months ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you, cheers. It's been a bit of a shock to the system, I have to admit, but that's all right, we're getting there. Just sort of thinking about, what can I do now to try and set them up for the future, really, and teach them some skills at their level so that, they learn how to manage money, how to manage pocket money, how to save for nice things and, delayed gratification, and then eventually, how to plant seeds so that they grow into investments, So, just kind of trying to work my way through that as a young father and having a bit of fun.
It's a lot of fun to be had, but there's also a bit of a serious side of that, Anton, in the sense that we don't know what type of society they will come into in 25 years' time, or when they turn 21, what sort of financial knowledge they might need then, huh?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And obviously none of us can predict the future, and that's why, it becomes so important to teach them to be critical thinkers, I guess, because in that case, it doesn't really matter what gets thrown at them. They'll be critical thinkers and they'll be able to work their way through it. But, look, at the moment, it's the system that we've got, and you sort of just have to assume that it's going to carry on that way. And so with that in mind, just trying to give them the skills that they need now so that they're well equipped for the future, I guess.
Very, very cool. What about you, Heather? I'm just trying to think back to my financial literacy. What did I do? We had a little primary school, Monarewa, there was a little wee bank book that we had, and we learnt to put it was actually a lot of fun writing $1 into the book. Can you recall that?
Into the slip, yes, there was always a deposit slip.
Into the deposit slip, that's right.
And it was originally done by the post office, and then I think it was ANZ took it over.
Was it ASB? The Auckland Savings Bank? I don't know.
Yeah, anyway, one of the tradings banks took it over. Yes, I remember doing that, and look, no matter what the future brings, it's hard to believe that there won't be some benefit in having a nest egg. So I think it's a great thing to teach our children. And I used to, when I gave my children pocket money, we would go and bank some of it, and then they would have some that they, had some discretionary spending. And they just accepted that as habit quite easily, really. I don't remember any great arguments about it, and they're benefiting from it now, which is great.
All right, Heather Roy, Anton Matthews with us on the panel this afternoon, Monday afternoon. A lot to talk about today. Looking forward to it, 4 to 5 p.m. Stay with us.
RNZ News at 4. Good afternoon. I'm Marama Tipoli. Border staff who have strongly refused to get the COVID vaccine may still be working and then walking around in the community for another 3 weeks. From today, their employers will start having conversations with them about moving out of frontline roles if they don't want the vaccine. But the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says they won't be forced out until the end of the month.
Those people would be at the head of the queue to be having a conversation with their employer about redeployment, but they won't have been required to be redeployed yet. The end date for that was always envisaged to be the end of April.
3 workers from Auckland's Grand Millennium MIQ Hotel have tested positive for COVID-19 recently. Only one was vaccinated. The president of the Māori Party has blamed volunteers misinterpreting the rules for its failure to declare more than $300,000 in donations. Any donation of over $30,000 must be declared to the Electoral Commission within 10 working days. 3 donations above that threshold were made to the Māori Party between March and October last year, but were only recently declared to the Commission, which has referred the party to the police. Māori Party President Shay Wilson says the mistake was made by party volunteers who were learning the ropes as they went along. He says the party is mindful of the significant consequences it could now face. The nurses' organisations say the collective agreement offer from the district health boards is completely unacceptable. The union says most members were offered a pay increase of 1.38%, which they say fails to recognise a heavy workload and highly pressurised working conditions. The union will now enter mediation with the DHBs. An international charity says locust swarms, extreme weather and below average rainfall means millions of people in Somalia will not have enough food. The BBC's Mary Harper has more.
Save the Children says crop and vegetable production is expected to drop by up to 80% this season. Income from livestock sales, a mainstay of the Somali economy, is projected to fall by up to 55%. The agency says mothers are desperately trying to scrape together just one meal a day for their children. Some of them are already malnourished. Projections say that this year, poor families in southern Somalia will only be able to source 15% of their food from their crops.
Mary Harper reporting. The head of Synlait Milk has abruptly resigned after less than 3 years in the job. Leon Clement, who has been the chief executive since September 2018, will leave the company at the end of the month, although his reasons for doing so are unclear. The company is a major supplier of infant formula to specialty dairy company A2 Milk and has been hit by a downturn and disruption of sales to that company. Last month, it reported a 76% fall in its first half profit and said it was hoping to break even for the full year. A Māori lawyer has created interactive teaching materials for teaching primary school children about Aotearoa's history. Roimata Smail is a human rights and public law lawyer. She says it's about helping teachers who don't know enough about Te Reo Māori and Aotearoa's history.
Sometimes we forget how, teachers coming through didn't get to learn these things themselves. So, for example, with Te Reo, it's actually really hard to teach Te Reo to 30 children if you're a beginner yourself. So I think just sometimes that's the gap that's there.
Roimata Smail says she believes good teaching resources can help counter discrimination against Māori. The Department of Conservation says none of the feral dogs roaming far north conservation land have been caught yet. Since the start of the month, the estimated 4 packs of dogs have forced the closure of Twilight Beach Campground and 4 walking tracks between 90 Mile Beach and Te Paki Reserve. The department says the restrictions will be reassessed over the next 2 weeks while more information is sought. The Cape Reinga Lighthouse Track and Te Paki Stream amenity areas are still open to the public. That's the news.
A call for the chair of the Auckland DHB to resign after admitting he got preferential treatment, moving to the front of the COVID vaccination queue.
Well, we missed something here, that Pat's giving vaccinations himself or that he's delivering babies in the ER. This is where this privileged mentality and the arrogance of the words they speak has got to end. Pat has got to go.
Checkpoint with me, Lisa Owen. 5 o'clock weekday evenings on RNZ National.
This is RNZ National on air, online and on demand. Back to Wallace Chapman and the panel shortly. Time now for the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Northland to Taranaki, including Taupo. Mostly cloudy with isolated showers. Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Rotorua. Cloudy with occasional rain, becoming mainly fine tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Cloudy periods, expect a few showers about the ranges and 1 or 2 spreading farther east. Whanganui to Wellington, including Taihape. Fine spells, isolated showers developing this afternoon, becoming widespread for a time tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough and Nelson, scattered showers developing this afternoon, possibly heavy tomorrow afternoon, then clearing. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain with squally thunderstorms and hail possible from this afternoon, especially in Westland, and clearing south of Hokitika later tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, also Southland, scattered rain or showers becoming widespread and persistent about Otago and inland Southland tomorrow afternoon. And the Chatham Islands, low cloud and rain at times. Taking a look now at the Met Service forecast for the mountains up to midnight Tuesday. In the North Island, Raukumara Forest Park to Te Urerewa, occasional rain with heavy falls possible tomorrow morning, clearing from tomorrow afternoon. The remaining North Island mountain areas, showers from this afternoon, possibly heavy today, and expect
Kia ora koutou katoa. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start by acknowledging the passing of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. Our thoughts continue to be with Her Majesty the Queen and the royal family at this time. Prince Philip's links with New Zealand were many and varied. The Duke of Edinburgh's Hillary Award has helped thousands of young Kiwis with self-development over the last 5 decades, in some cases helping to transform lives, including in prisons, refugee centres and teen parent units. He was patron of the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron and a life member of the Aviation Industry Association of New Zealand. He was an honorary fellow of the New Zealand Institute of Professional Engineers, the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve Veterans Association of New Zealand and the Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners. He held ranks of Field Marshal of the New Zealand Army, Admiral of the Fleet of the Royal New Zealand Navy and Marshal of the Royal New Zealand Air Force. There are 3 condolence books for His Royal Highness at Parliament and 1 at the National Library. Visits and ceremonial events are also providing advice to local councils on setting up books in other centres. People are also able to email messages to condolences@dia.govt.nz. I can confirm that a state memorial service will be held for Prince Philip in New Zealand at 3 p.m. on Wednesday, 21 April, and we'll be basing that physically here in Wellington. The Governor-General and I will participate in the service, and we will put out further details shortly. Tomorrow, flags will fly at half-mast, while the House sits for statements from party leaders acknowledging the life of His Royal Highness. It will then adjourn for the day. Flags will also be flown at half-mast on the day of the funeral in the United Kingdom and on Wednesday, 21 April, the day of New Zealand's State Memorial. A look now to the rest of the week. Tomorrow I'm in Wellington for the Notice of Motion in the House, but I'll also be presenting the Prime Minister's Science Prize at the National War Memorial. Wednesday is the House and Cabinet Committees. On Thursday, we will make an announcement on boosting mental health support in schools. Friday, I'll be speaking at the opening of the Convita Wellness Lab in Auckland and also attending Polyfest. Last Friday marked 1 year since the establishment of New Zealand's managed isolation and quarantine system, and I'd like to take this opportunity to once again thank all those who have worked so hard over the past 12 months to keep New Zealand and New Zealanders safe. When we set out our COVID vaccination program earlier this year, we prioritised workers at these facilities, along with those working at the border. I can confirm that as of this afternoon, that 86% of managed isolation and quarantine facility workers have been vaccinated. On Wednesday, we will provide an additional update on progress. But our position has always been that from a certain date, those not vaccinated will need to be moved from the front line. That date was previously set as the 12th of April through to the 30th of April. That's why we've had a very deliberate strategy around ensuring every person working at the border in an MIQ facility has had the opportunity to be vaccinated before we start working through the process of those workers being redeployed. As part of that strategy, we set up vaccination sites at workplaces. We worked with employers to make sure workers were given time and support to go and get vaccinated. We communicated directly with workers via letters and emails. We ran online health question and answer sessions for workers. We set up a dedicated email address for employers to contact us with vaccine-related questions. And we rolled out a social media campaign to encourage uptake. On March 23rd, efforts were stepped up, requiring employers to have individual conversations with workers to identify and record their vaccination status and provide support for those not yet vaccinated. On March 31, and then again on Tuesday last week, employers were asked to provide up-to-date information about the vaccination status of their workers. On Wednesday last week, we issued guidance and next steps for workers who remained unable or unwilling to be vaccinated. As Brigadier Bliss said at 1 p.m. today, the safety of our border workforce is paramount. They have sacrificed so much to do what they do for us, which is why we feel obligated to make sure that they are vaccinated and that we keep them safe. And that is why, as I said, from today onwards, if a border or MIQ worker is not vaccinated, their employers will need to consider alternative options for them. By the end of April, those not vaccinated will not be permitted to work in those high-risk workplaces and will be moved to other roles. And as I've said, that's a timeline that has been set out for some time. Some people have legitimate questions around the vaccine, for instance, if they have pre-existing health conditions, and we are working with people to allay concerns and provide support. But ultimately, we also need to make sure we fulfil our obligations as employers and as contractors and make sure we keep them safe. The vaccination program is the biggest and most ambitious in New Zealand's history. We've always been open that 2 periods in time, the targeted element at the beginning of the program, but also the massive ramp up as we head into the general population, will present challenges. The rest of the world is seeing that too, but we are making progress and moving overall towards a safer environment here in New Zealand. I have Minister Hipkins here as well. We are happy to provide further information and to take your questions now. I'll come to the TVs first. Gina.
Why haven't we half-masted the flags for the whole week of mourning?
Yeah, we have different legislation around our flags in the likes of the UK and Canada. And so our flags, you will have seen half-masted straight away. They will be during the house, they will on the day of the funeral, and they will also at the time that we hold the state memorial here. And that's just simply the legislative framework we have. There was a discussion around the fact that we could rescind that and set it all the way through, but it's just the nature of our framework.
You pick the 21st of April, it's also the Queen's birthday.
And look, ultimately, you know, what we also had to take into account was not wanting to wait too long after the official funeral. And so we did have conversations around that as well. We're also having to juggle investitures here in New Zealand, and so there were some challenges, but ultimately that was the closest proximity to the funeral that we were able to hold that event.
Is it appropriate to have it on her birthday?
Oh, look, no one wants anyone to be in a state of grief at a time of their birthday. No one. But equally, of course, New Zealand has an obligation to make sure that we respectfully do not hold the memorial before the funeral, but do it as close proximity thereafter as we could.
If you don't specifically know how many frontline border workers there are, how can you say that 86% have been vaccinated?
Because we do know. You'll have heard us at the end of last week, we gave the update of over 80%. Over the course of today, we've been reaching out to managed isolation facilities to get their latest numbers, and that's brought back that figure of 86%.
So how many are there?
So of the total figure that we're working at as of today, working in our managed isolation facilities, we've had 3,472 have been vaccinated.
Do we know why this...
Of the total of 4,010.
Do we know why the security guard basically didn't turn up for 2 vaccinations?
My understanding of the second, you're talking about case C, the second security guard. On the one last week, no, I don't have more information about why they didn't arrive. They had several appointments. They simply didn't present for those appointments. The second person, my understanding is that they had one appointment which they missed. People do miss appointments, and that their second appointment that had been booked for them, they were already isolating as a close contact of case B by when that rolled around. So they didn't come out of isolation to go to the vaccination appointment.
Why don't we know this by now about the one last week?
Obviously, health officials have the rationale. They know enough to tell us it wasn't vaccine hesitancy, but they know the individual details of that case, and we've left it up to them as to whether or not they provide the details as to why the personal reason that person did not attend. Overall, we know that First Security, as of the end of last week, had 79% of their workforce had been vaccinated. They, of course, know the urgency we place on them ensuring that 100% of their workforce are vaccinated. Otherwise, they will need to withdraw those workers who are currently in our MIQ facilities. First I'll come to Jason and then we'll come to Joe.
I mean, from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that used to be, you had said from they had till the end of April, but you've changed it today till basically from saying tomorrow that employees will need to
No, we've
consider
always
their
had a period, so you will have heard me say on Friday that process of sitting down with those who have not been vaccinated starts today and runs through till the end of April, so that from the 1st of May, essentially no one has not been vaccinated should be working in our facilities.
What exactly do you mean by their employees will need to consider their options?
Oh, basically, either they're redeployed. If there is not an option to redeploy them, then it'll be up to the employer to work through what then happens with that individual, but they cannot work in MIQ.
Just
Does it
clarify
worry you what sort of a message?
Oh, sorry, I did say I'd come to you, Jo.
Does it worry you what sort of a message it sends when you're able to stand up here and say that those 2 appointments were missed, but not provide the reason for that, and what message that might send to people around the vaccine and those who perhaps do have hesitancy and realise that there's no sort of accountability for those people?
Firstly, I'd say that there is. If this individual is not vaccinated, they will not be able to work in these facilities. So here, the bar is very high. There is essentially no reason that we consider acceptable. Because it is a facility that individuals are at risk, we feel an obligation to make sure that they are looked after. The whole point of the vaccine is to ensure that they do not become seriously unwell. And so regardless of whatever the rationale was, from May, none of them will be acceptable.
So it's really important to clarify, and we've been through this before, through the contact tracing process, which is how we understand, that the person had 2 appointments and missed them, and we interview the public health officials will know the answers to those questions. We share that information, or they share that information with us, and we share it with you, where there is a public health reason to do so. People share huge amounts of their personal information about who they've seen, when they've seen them, why they've seen them, and so on. We share that, and they share that with us, when there's a public health risk or some other reason to share it. The fact that someone missed a vaccine appointment, yes, the public health people will know that. They have told us it's not because the person was vaccine hesitant, and I accept that as an explanation. But that doesn't mean that somebody who happens to have contracted COVID-19 has to share every detail of their life with the New Zealand public.
Yes.
At 1 p.m, the Director General said he didn't know as yet how many border workers hadn't been vaccinated. How is it now that you're able to provide that?
It's MB that are ultimately responsible for the gathering that information, so that doesn't surprise me that the Director General may not have had that before him at that time. We sought an update, of course, before we came down so we could provide it to you. You'll recall that on Friday we indicated that it was over 80%. We're now at 86%. On Wednesday we'll provide another update again on the progress that's being made, and that'll be provided by MB, who has responsibility for MIQ. No, MIQ workers. Well, actually, for the border workers, my understanding is that actually as a proportion, it's relatively high for our border workers, but MIQ is what I'm speaking to today.
The issue with border workers is obviously there's quite a big data exercise here, because the size of that workforce very much depends on who you count. So if you're counting everybody who works for an airline, for example, and is it all of the airlines and so on. So we can provide a bit more information on that on Wednesday, but one of the exercises that's been going through at the moment is comparing to the testing information, because some of the people who have been tested, for example, may no longer be working in those roles and may not be vaccinated because they may not have worked there for several months, but they'll still be on the testing register.
The overall border numbers that we provided are relatively high, but we've now broken it down into specifically MIQ. MB even have insights into individual facilities and how they are tracking. They're in relatively similar positions as individual facilities, where on average we're looking at about 14% still yet to be vaccinated.
Specifically, how many people are in your own group 1?
In Tier 1, it's upward of 20,000
around
from
about
memory.
20,000.
Around about 20,000.
Plus their household contacts, and in the household contacts we don't have a firm number on that. Very much depends on the border workers telling us how many of their household contacts there are.
30,000 haven't been vaccinated.
So look, today we've focused on giving you the explicit breakdown, the latest on our managed isolation facility workers. We have individual numbers for different agencies. Customs, the proportion is very high. MPI, very high. Immigration, again. On average, my recollection is over 80% for those agencies, but we'll provide that breakdown of the latest on Wednesday as well.
Across all the facilities, then
it is, as I'm saying, Cobra, it is the vast majority. We have the individuals for the agencies. In most cases, it's upward of 80%, but we'll look to provide that on Wednesday as well.
Derek. Facility
and
the number of workers at each facility. Why not release that data? Why can't we Why can't we see that?
We've said that we've provided you the overall numbers. I've given you that on average for each facility, it's roughly 14%. For the facility in question that we've been dealing with, they were at 81% as of Friday. But again, I'm happy to provide that data on Wednesday. I think, look, the question here you're asking is, do we have an insight of the trajectory of managed isolation facilities generally? The answer is yes. Of course, that will change daily. So we've got a snapshot for you today. We'll provide another one in the next 72 hours.
For some time because
Sorry, Derek?
We've been asking for daily snapshots on vaccination rollout for some time, and we haven't really, we haven't been given one. Is it why not?
I would refute that. We have. We started reporting on Wednesday with a dashboard.
Yeah, the dashboard shows daily numbers a week.
Yeah, absolutely. But keeping in mind, I mean, this is a very, as you've just seen, that we've provided this data with you from today. It has changed even from what we had on Friday, because of course every day we're expecting that people are being vaccinated, and so we're having to make sure that we're updating and have the most accurate picture possible, which is why we're providing information today, and we'll do so again on Wednesday. Okay, in the front.
Thanks. On February 15, you said that it would take 2 or 3 weeks to get through
Yep.
the whole of the border workforce. But clearly that hasn't occurred. Why is that?
Logistically, our view is absolutely that was the time it would take to get those first doses out, and we had the capacity to do so. We have a position, though, where there are some individuals who within that time frame have not been. They now know that, of course, a window for them to be vaccinated and remain in their roles is closing.
For the individuals, for why that hasn't
Oh, look, we also have to make sure that it's accessible, that they are able to have the time, that our night shift workers are given the opportunity to be vaccinated in a time that's meaningful as well for them. And there are, Minister Hipkins perhaps can expand on this, there are some workers who are not consistently in our managed isolation facilities. There are some there who are there consistently, but there are some who will be more sporadically involved.
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at the overall total number of who might fall within that 20,000, you'll have some people who, for example, might have worked a couple of shifts. They might work for a contracted security firm. They may predominantly work doing security somewhere else, and they may have worked a few shifts. When they've worked a shift in MIQ, they therefore need to be tested, but they may no longer be working there. If you think about airline staff, for example, someone may have crewed a couple of international flights several months ago, not done any international flying since then, they would still be included potentially in that number. So one of the things that we've got to do, and we're talking about hundreds of employers, because you've got everything from Air New Zealand and our big government agencies who employ a lot of people, through to the small retail outlets that are working airside of the border, where they may only have a handful of employees who are working in them. So we've got to go through and identify each individual person, what their NHI number is, so we can link it to their vaccination record, and make sure that if someone hasn't been vaccinated, we understand the reason for that. Now, that's a process that does require a bit of manual reconciliation.
Okay, I'll give you the last one and then I'll come to Benedict.
On the surveillance testing, right, Brigadier Jim Bliss today was basically saying, look, this worker, they weren't tested within the 14-day cycle, and we can't tell when they were last tested. We have some information, but mostly all we get is a high level, this percentage has been tested. What confidence can you have that your legal order that these workers be tested every fortnight is actually occurring if he can't be confident in it?
So we do have a register, about 12,000 active border workers are on the register, which means we're monitoring those 12,000 people. They are being tested. Their test results are automatically linked back into the register. We can tell when they have been tested and when they haven't. There are an additional group of workers where the employers are not using the register. They have been keeping their own records. I am making the use of the register compulsory, so this will ultimately address this particular data issue, and it is predominantly a data issue rather than an issue of people being tested. But that will mean that we will then have the complete register, so we'll be able to have all of that information in a format that's easier to report.
When is that happening? How are you doing that?
We've just gone through the legal process of getting the order in place. I haven't yet signed the order. I'm expecting that final order to come in the next sort of 24 hours or so. Then it'll be signed and that notification will go out.
Keep in mind, in the meantime, there is a legal requirement on those employers to ensure that their employees are tested. So that is where the obligation currently sits. We've taken that extra step of then obliging them to share those records as well.
If they don't, what's their punishment?
You don't know currently if they are or not.
Fines and reputational damage.
How much are the fines?
You don't know currently if they are or aren't, right?
So what's your...
By law, they are obliged.
On what? What's your particular question?
You don't know currently if they are doing the 14.
So employers, if you take MIQ, the contractors who are supplying labour to MIQ, they are reporting to MIQ their testing results regularly.
Yeah.
Reputational damage. You did say on the reputational damage. Are you suggesting that if they don't comply, you're going to name and shame employers from this?
No, not at all. But you've got an example right now that we're speaking to, where obviously there's a discussion over whether or not obligations have been met.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, they've been issuing permits for companies to export weapons and military equipment to countries while they've been on a United Nations blacklist for killing children in the war in Yemen. Does that concern you?
Yeah, and what I've already said is that we absolutely have an expectation that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, who are the ones that administer this regime, are upholding our laws. So that means they need to follow any UN sanctions that are in place and any UN resolutions that are in place. Secondly, they also need to make sure that they're operating under our regulations as well. What's been brought into question is whether or not that regime is fit for purpose. We've asked the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade to undertake a piece of work since recently we had the debate over, for instance, Air New Zealand export orders.
It's appropriate for Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade to be involved in that review, though.
Ultimately we are, and I've said to the Ministry, and so is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, people have to have faith in that review work, so let's make sure that in doing it, we're appointing individuals and creating a process where people at the end of it can say, yep, they agree that it was done in a way that they can see credibility in the outcome. I'll let you have the last question.
You don't think being on a blacklist for killing children
with
the United Nations should disqualify?
No, whilst I haven't commented on individual exporters, of course we expect our values to be maintained in this process. It's the whole point of it. Okay, let me just work through individuals carefully. So who hasn't had a question, if I may? Yeah.
When you say border workers who haven't been vaccinated by the end of April cannot work for MIQ, how exactly are you going to enforce that? Are you going to put a health order in place? Or how?
Yeah, and so at the moment we're looking at whether or not that will require a Section 11, as I've got this correct. But ultimately, MB will be making sure that no individuals at that point who haven't been will be able to work there.
And it is being built into the contracts.
Contracts in particular provide us a nice, easy way to deal with that.
Prime Minister, the Ministry of Health, you announced in Budget 2019 that you would spend a lot of money creating a new frontline mental health service. It was due to spend $145 million by July. It's only spent $67 million in March, less than half of that. Basically, COVID was part of the problem there. But is that really good enough? Are you disappointed with how slow the rollout's been?
Yeah, and if we look at what we've been able to see delivered in that period, so this primary mental health service, which is essentially allowing people that when they go and visit their GPs, that if their GP has concern that they are in distress, that they're able to see someone straight away who can provide support. So that service now, I'm told, is reaching potentially up to 900,000 enrolled individuals who might be enrolled in GP services where that service is provided. It's provided over 9,000 cases of interaction to support people who need it when they need it most. We do want to keep that rollout going and we do want to pick up the pace of that, but unfortunately the Ministry of Health has identified that in some cases COVID has delayed that rollout.
Has it actually had any effect on the overall demand for mental health services? The point of it, if I'm not wrong, was to kind of take off some of the strain off the acute end, so the acute end was kind of safe for the actual acute cases. But we're still
I'd say it would definitely. Yeah, two things I'd say on that. I think it is definitely too early to say that we would see the impacts of this primary mental health rollout as a point of intervention for our acute services. I think far too early to say that, but that is the ultimate goal of that program, is to support people earlier or to support people who previously would have received no help and not even manifest in our acute programs. Because keep in mind, for instance, a number of people who attempt to take their own life, the proportion of which have no contact with mental health services before that point is relatively high.
Expected to have an effect on acute services right now, if that's fair.
Not necessarily.
Why not give more help to acute services then, which are clearly under such serious?
And I would argue
you only had the help, but you had to legally give under the ring fence.
And I would argue that, of course, we see that as well. I mean, look, I was only on Friday at the new the new improved services that have been built at the Mason Clinic. We've purchased extra property there to support those services. We are redoing acute mental health services in Palmerston North, in the Hamilton region as well. You know, we absolutely agree and know that we need to prioritise continuing to work on those services too.
Prime Minister, just on tomorrow's
just
on tomorrow's motion for Prince Philip in
Yeah.
the House, sort of what will that include, and what is the significance of that, particularly with the House sitting for a motion and then rising straight away for the rest of the day?
Yeah, and look, in these cases which are infrequent, it's about making sure that we demonstrate the respect and regard for which we hold the Duke of Edinburgh, and just demonstrate, of course, that we acknowledge the impact that this will have on the royal household and our situation, of course, with our head of state. It gives every leader of the House, leader of the parties, a chance to reflect also on their perspective of the contribution that His Royal Highness had within New Zealand as well. You know, that conviction was significant, particularly for our armed forces. That is being acknowledged and has been acknowledged in the fact that our Defence Attaché is one of a few members who have been invited to be a part of the memorial service. And that's an acknowledgement, I think, of a connection that the Duke of Edinburgh had to New Zealand and our Defence Force.
There are now 3 cases linked to the Grand Millennium Hotel, but Australia hasn't changed border settings.
No.
Now, obviously, back in January, it only took 1 case for Australia to close its border to New Zealand. Why do you think the changes happened? Has there been some sort of shift? Is there better communication? Is it an agreed Trans-Tasman bubble protocol?
I think it's just a demonstration of the fact that every case will have its own circumstances. So what we were dealing with in Northern was a situation of a released person who had come through our border system, was found to have contracted COVID late in their stay, and then had a number of, obviously, locations of interest. However, this case, someone's been picked up in our surveillance, they're linked to a known case, the locations of interest are small, very good communication between our officials. So that doesn't surprise me. I think each circumstance won't necessarily be about the number of cases, but the circumstances around those cases. Would you agree with that, William?
Prince Philip. I mean, obviously his death has been given the reverence that it deserves,
Yeah.
but there's a sort of unmentioned tension around his record of making racist statements, his links in New Zealand to his family as colonisers. So my question is, will the memorial service, will that attempt to square the circle of his legacy, or to deal with that challenge, or would you advise people that feel that way just to tune out at Wednesday?
No, I'd just say that, that through our history, of course, we will have, challenging elements to the foundation of our history as a nation. But now also offers an opportunity for us to acknowledge the contribution of someone who ultimately, no matter what anyone's opinion will be, who ultimately gave his entire life almost to the service of others. And I said this at some other point today, when we come into politics, I think we very knowingly do so for a particular period of time. We often don't know how long that will be, but we for the most part know it will not be the majority of our working life. But for Prince Philip it was, and he knew that, and I think there's something very significant about that.
Open letter from Health and Social Services today regarding drug reform. What is your response to that letter, and what consideration is your government give to changing?
Yeah, I want to absolutely acknowledge the purpose and the point of why they are raising the issues that they are. In fact, as a government in the last term, we saw some of those issues around how do we reduce the harm that's being done amongst those particularly who are not the suppliers, who we still believe we need to go hard against, but those who are found to be in personal possession. We changed the Misuse of Drugs Act to oblige the police now to make sure that they take a health-based approach for those individuals, regardless of the drug they're found in possession of, unless it is not in the public interest to do so. We've seen as a result of that a real decline in the number of people who are going before the courts. It's sitting now at about 40% for certain drugs, 20% for cannabis, which has remained about static. What I'd like to do now is dig into that in more detail. Is it achieving the goal we set, which was a health-based approach, or are we seeing a bit more of a subjective approach being taken? And that's a conversation I'd like to have with some of those organisations.
Memorial service.
Can I add one more thing? I do think on an issue like this, it would be helpful if Parliament took more of a bipartisan approach. We have already made significant moves to make this a health-based issue, but I really would challenge, for instance, the National Party to consider their position on this issue because they criticised us when we did that, and I would like to see whether or not Parliament can reach some consensus on these issues. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, our Cabinet Office is in frequent contact with the Palace, as will be a number of Commonwealth nations, and they'll be made aware of our arrangements. I think that there is an understanding, of course, that different countries will be in different circumstances and their rules will allow them to do different things. We happen to be in the very lucky position where we can openly gather together. And I think there's an appreciation of that. But at the same time, there is, of course, the opportunity for close family and friends to be gathering for the Duke in the United Kingdom itself.
It's rather unusual, isn't it?
It is a very unusual set of circumstances, but I think that just speaks to the hard work everyone has done here. We, however, have experienced times where we've not been able to have large numbers gather for funerals, and I think that gives an added appreciation for all New Zealanders who understand how sad it is when that's not a possibility.
The final count in the Samoa election is underway. It's very much still in the balance. How do you think the sort of competitive result, whichever way it goes, will affect Samoa-New Zealand relations? And do you have any concerns about the potential for instability in the Pacific, given the possibility of a deadlock, or there've been allegations of electoral fraud made by Prime Minister Tuilepa against FAST? Does that concern you?
Oh, look, when it comes to some of the exchanges between political parties, I won't venture into that space particularly. Those are issues, of course, that their judicial system will be able to resolve and has been involved in previous elections. I think what we accept is that there's a bit of water yet to go under the bridge in terms of process, and I don't think that's a surprise given the outcome that election has produced. When it comes to the future, whatever the final outcome is, New Zealand's relationship with both candidates, including the incumbent and challenger, is very, very strong. Those ties with both of course, Prime Minister Tuilepa, but also what was his Deputy Prime Minister are close, and I'm very confident that regardless of the outcome will remain so.
You've talked about digging down into that data since November last year, following the referendum result. Has any digging started?
Yeah, so I've received just recently a bit more on that, and that's why I was able to provide that difference in, for instance, in drug charges. But what I want to go back to and look in a little bit more detail at the moment, what I've been provided with is where that was the most significant charge that was laid. Whereas what I hear continues to be an issue is if you have someone who has received multiple charges, where those possession charges are still featuring more prominently. So I just want to get into a bit more detail around that. It is something that I do want to provide more publicly because I think this would be helpful for us to be able to see the effects of those law changes, whether or not we think it's having the desired effect, which ultimately is for individuals in individual possession, let's take that health approach.
In January for the weird drug possession.
Sorry, what was that, Derek?
The data in January for weird drug possession was the most serious charge. Still showed a third of those people going to court, and still showed about 114.
The most recent I have. Oh, is that for overall or broken down?
Most serious charge, drug possession.
But for cannabis or for all, yeah. And so, as I say, the data that I've seen, and if my memory is serving me correctly, is that for cannabis it looks a little more static against previous years and is sitting at around the 20% mark. Methamphetamine, it's come off a very high percentage where almost always there's a charge placed down to about 40%. Well, I think ultimately the goal was that for possession we were moving people to a health-based approach. We were treating the cause of the issue. And so unless there was a public interest reason not to do so, I'd like to hear, through perhaps case studies, what are the public interest tests that are being applied here? Where are the police making those decisions where they believe a charge is still appropriate? Okay, I'm going to just narrow down to a couple who have not yet had a question. Janae and then Richard.
On electricity, there are some manufacturers that are curtailing production of their goods because wholesale prices are really high.
Yeah.
Is the government looking at changing any of the rules around the way the market's regulated or anything like that to try to prevent the situation where manufacturers are having to cut back?
I do believe that Minister Woods is looking a little bit at our current situation. Best to get a quick update from her as to what she's commissioned from officials. But it is fair to say we're keeping a very close eye on what's happening in the market at the moment. And there's a range of contributing factors to why we're seeing what we are right now.
Do you have any response to the letter from the National Party last week seeking an extension to the consideration of the Climate Change Commission?
Oh, I don't know that. I personally can't give you an update on that, Richard, so I'm afraid, so I'll need to come back to you on that.
On festival drug testing.
Just check who hasn't asked a question. Everyone has, so I'm going to take final two. Yes, I'll give you one, Henry, and then I'm going to finish with you, Joe.
On festival drug testing, you said the government indicated last week that you'd
Yeah.
made the new law permanent. The operators weren't actually able to be at most of the largest festivals in the country because they have enough funding to buy the very expensive equipment that's needed. Are you looking at all and maybe possibly funding drug testing at all, or is that a red line you would cross?
No, look, I wouldn't say that it's something that's being ruled out. It's just not something that we've considered. You know, our focus was just getting the regulatory regime in place that would allow the testing to occur in the first place. So that's not a question that's being put to me. It's not an issue that's being raised with me directly around the abilities. I would like to see, I mean, for the most part, you do see festivals held at different points in time. What would be useful is if we could see a little bit of rotation moving across the country to enable wider use as possible.
Mr Hipkins, does it sit comfortably with you the increase in money being spent on contractors? Obviously in health you would accept that given the COVID situation, but the likes of the Ministry of Transport, for example. Does that sit comfortably with you given your own motivations to actually see a reduction there?
The government's expectations are really clear, and we are seeing the percentage of overall expenditure on consultants and contractors going down relative to the spend on people who are employed by the public service. But yes, COVID-19 has resulted in an increase in some areas. Some of the big change proposals have resulted in an increase. And in places like transport, where it is largely a contractor-led industry, then you will see increases because we're doing a lot more in that space. What was that?
What are you doing in the Ministry of Transport space that's required?
Well, we're building more roads.
You're building more roads?
Yeah.
Okay,
including for public transport. I mean, the spend that we've got across transport is significant. It is one of the most significant contributing factors to our climate profile. So we also have a considerable program there to try and transition away from the ongoing contribution of transport to our carbon emissions. So I think if you talk to Minister Wood in particular, there is a significant work program that's going on in transport. You've been critiquing us on things like light rail as well. You'll know. Thanks, everyone.
Locked out of participating in our communities. And so, for example, 98% of houses are inaccessible. So for people who need that physical access, that means they are often living in inadequate housing.